listener production.
I'm automotive commentator and journalist Greg Rust, and this is Rusty's Garage. This episode's been a long time in the making. My guest is Russell Ingall, a proper modern-day legend of Australian motorsport. I'm beaming in from home and he's at his place on the Gold Coast. He's not really done the whole book or This Is Your Life chat, so we're immensely proud and thankful that he's decided to do a podcast. He really should do a book as well. I've known Russell for over 20 years. I've only ever known him to be a hard racer, something I really admire. He's a character, someone with a strong viewpoint and, importantly, conviction. This is the longest podcast I've done. Russell was up for a chat and I promise you will love every minute of it. For that reason, we've split it into 3 episodes, something we rarely do. We cover a huge amount of ground. His early years in karting that shaped the man we would come to know as the Enforcer. We'll do something that hasn't often been done. Stop and celebrate a seriously impressive chapter racing overseas and some of the big names he went wheel to wheel with. The learnings from that important part of his career and the intensity of racing in Europe and the politics. Of course, we'll talk supercars, the first appearances at Bathurst, working with Larry Perkins and winning the great race. The influence of his close friend, the late Barry Sheene, winning the title with the Stone Brothers, that rivalry with Mark Skaife, his work in the media, including the success of his online show, The Enforcer and the Dude. We'll tackle some of your questions and have a few laughs about some behind-the-scenes stories. Listen out for a few things I hadn't heard before too. Opportunities in the US and the British Touring Car Championship. The toll not being in a race car took on him when he ventured into broadcasting, which is why he still loves putting the helmet on and racing even now. Plus, his views on the future of supercars. We'll begin with the early years. The memories are as vivid now, and it's so cool that he's keen to share them with you all.
Geez, I hope you're ready for this, mate. This could go pear-shaped really easy, and you've known me for plenty of years, as long as I've known you. And look, it's great to be on Australia's biggest podcast. Geez, I feel a little bit on it, and funnily enough, a little bit nervous too about this because
why?
Well, I really haven't done the life and times of yours truly. I sort of, as out there as I am, I'm sort of a little bit reserved in a lot of things, and I don't go around pumping up my own tyres that much, to be quite honest. And I've never really, a lot of people have asked me about doing books and all this sort of thing. I'm going, maybe not, So this is the first time I've actually done anything like this. So it's going to be interesting for me as well, looking back in the revision mirror.
Well, mate, there's so much to cover, Russell, in so many ways. So tell me about those early years. What are the early influences?
Well, to get back to the original one, growing up in Adelaide, I came out to Australia from England when I was 3. People could say, actually, only the other day, because I did a charity thing for breast cancer on the weekend, and someone asked me there, how long have you been out from New Zealand? I think it's a combination of the Pommy and Australian accent, but my dad was a motor mechanic in England. He came out. He was one of the 10-pound Poms, and we rolled straight. So I think you had 2 options. I think it was Adelaide and I think Adelaide and WA. But anyway, we took Adelaide and grew up around cars. My father owned a service station, a Shell service station actually in Port Adelaide. And that was probably a lot of the influence in getting, because my mother died of breast cancer when I was very young, and it was just the 2 of us. So just the 2 of us growing together in a 3-bedroom house in Adelaide, very modest. He was a dead set hard worker. It was one of those where service stations actually lived up to its name, service, put the petrol in, someone comes out, fills your car up, pumps your tyres up, washes your screen, the whole bit. So I grew up around that, used to cycle from school in the afternoon into Port Adelaide and then straight into taking sump plugs out and working on cars and that sort of thing. So I think that's where the whole, love of motoring and motorsport, and we got into karting very young as well when I was 12 years old, because there was an old relic of a kart in a crash repair that was out the back of Dad's service station. He used to rent it to this guy that used to fix cars, a panel, and it was hanging up on a nail on the side, this frame of a A-frame go-kart. So we kept eyeing it off, and Dad said, "Oh, do you want to give it a go?" And so we dragged it off the wall and bought a McCulloch chainsaw engine and whacked that on, and that was the engine of the day, and that's how it all started. But yeah, it was. I think that's where the whole passion for the whole motorsport thing kicked off. Was back in those early days of kicking around cars and working on them.
What was the local track? Was it Whyalla that you used to go to? And did it click straight away for you, Russell?
Actually, I started racing motocross when I was about 10, and I only did 3 years of that. And I found out two things. Number one, I probably wasn't very good. Number two is it hurts when you come off, big time. So I think there was a transition over to go-kart racing. But yeah, I mean, we had some great tracks. There was Bolivar, which was the biggest one. That was on your way out to Adelaide International Raceway. Barossa Valley, which is right in the middle of Barossa Valley, this beautiful scenic track. It was a stunning place. Then they had another one called the Pines, which was out there up in the hills of Lobenthal. So we probably had 4 or 5. Whyalla, it was obviously one as well. Port Augusta. So we had some really cool tracks around the place, and I think that's what the attraction was in karting, because you had in your own state you had so many cool places to go to. And then later on in the years, when I started doing it pretty serious, because I ended up owning a kart shop, and we used to go all around Australia, WA, Perth, Toowoomba, and all these sort of places. So it was a great time. I think karting was probably one of the best eras of my motorsport career ever. I think it was just so enjoyable, so competitive, and I did it from when I was 12 to my late teens. So it was a big innings.
Were you always sort of fiercely competitive? And later on you'd get that great reputation for being tough and uncompromising and things like that. But did that nature come out very early in you in the karting phase?
Oh, absolutely. I think because of the and I always say, and I was very interested because I'm a massive, as you know, a massive Ayrton Senna fan. I think he was the all-time most complete and best race driver. And I remember during his documentary that he did, he was asked a question, what motorsport did you enjoy the most? And he sat back and thought about it and went, go-karts. He said go-kart racing. His answer, which I reckon was spot on, is the most pure form of motor racing. And I think what he means by that is it's raw. It's a fairly basic sort of machine. Pretty well anyone could buy or have the same equipment as what you got. So it came down to the driver. The guy behind the wheel and those two pedals, that's what it actually came down to. And I felt exactly the same. It was a form of motorsport where it was fiercely competitive. You had to push the limits because you didn't have an equipment advantage. It was purely down to the driver and the competition side of it, as far as wheel-to-wheel racing, to a point where I actually got disappointed as I started moving up the pyramid and up the food chain of motor racing, that I found the challenges still the same and probably more so, but when you got down to the raw form, the actual wheel-to-wheel racing, karting was the best, and I missed that as you went up. I found that got less and less, and it was more about other factors, just different. But when you come down to it, it was such good years and made a lot of friendships along the way, but more importantly, it gave you a gauge whether you had it or not, whether you had the it factor and you were going to either pursue it as a motorsport, as a hobby, or you're going to get serious and have a big swing at it and then dedicate your life to it. And I was fiercely competitive and it went all the way to I ended up owning a kart shop with a partner of mine, Colin Moat, who was in that era very renowned for his engine tuning capabilities, and we ended up manufacturing our own kart. And Drew Price, who's still in the kart business to this day, manufacturing the Demon karts, he was our main competition, or he was the benchmark. And 1 year we ended up taking out most of the championships that year. I think we built 250 chassis in 1 year.
Amazing.
There's a little workshop up at just outside of Adelaide CBD, and with the three of us working there, we're all hands on. And I think you sort of look back at those sort of things, Greg, and you go, you take it for granted a bit. Those sort of days you were just living day to day, week to week, and it was just all about the kart racing and trying to run a business in my my late teens. And there was a lot going on, and you never thought about later on how many life lessons that taught you along the way, as far as how to bring out the best in yourself, how to manage certain situations. And I learned a lot from those years, not just on the track but off the track as well. Yeah. But it's during that period that I had to make a call. The call was, do I just do karts for the rest of my life and run a kart shop and end up just doing that? Or do I have a swing at, see if I can actually get somewhere? And I think out of all of it, and I was lucky enough, well, not lucky enough, it was through hard work, and that I won quite a few kart championships, and had to make the call. Rightio, do I just try and keep heading up the ladder? And I made the call. I said, okay, let's do this. I started racing Formula Fords, and with all things like that, once I start going into another form of motorsport, the karting side of it suffered a little bit, and my business partner at that stage said, look, you got to make a decision. Are we going to do this as a business, or are you going to go off and try and be a race driver full time? And it came down to the decision. I said, well, look, I want to give this a go. I reckon I can do it. And so I ended up selling my half of the business out, and then started doing Formula Fords full time. But it was a hard decision, because you've got a business here that's earning good money, and it was your livelihood. Or do I just throw all that away? There was 10 years of work into it, and then flow into something else. But anyway, I made that call, and that was sort of like in the late 80s. And in the end, I think it was the right decision, but it was a tough call. It was like, whew, okay, we're just about to jump on this train. Here we go.
Big call, but it would pay dividends taking that risk, Russell. So the two things out of that comment that I love is, I love the fact that, like Senna, the purity of karting is something that really appealed to you. And clearly that you've been very savvy in a commercial sense in your racing life, and there were some great early lessons that karting business clearly helped you with. I want to, just before we move into Formula Ford and the car racing phase, if you will, you talked about it being karting a place less likely compared to motocross to get an injury, but you did lose a finger, Russell, didn't you? What happened?
It was Oran Park. I was just trying to think what year. I think it was 80, because it was just before I started racing full time in Formula Ford. I think it was 87, and there was a CIK, an international meeting at Oran Park. That's when they used to turn off just after the bridge at Oran Park. They used to turn off.
Great old track.
Yeah. Straight down the hill. Oh, it was magnificent. And they had quite a few international events there, which I used to go to all of them and be part of the Australia team. And they used to bring out all the greats. There's Giancarlo Fisichella, and Max Pappas was an awesome driver. He actually won the CIK event there a couple of times. So they used to bring the Italian, European teams, and all the teams from the manufacturers used to come over here, UK as well, and all assemble at Oran Park and have this massive international meeting. It was just so good to be part of all that. And so we were. That was at that meet. We actually had a meeting just before that, which was a test meeting before we rolled into the CIK, I ended up coming up over the bridge, and typical of me, tried a manoeuvre that was probably a little bit iffy and run out of real estate. Anyway, I got tangled up with this other guy, flipped over, and I mustn't have let go of the steering wheel, and was actually dragging up over the bridge on the steering wheel, and I must have just, fighting it to the death, holding it up. When you're upside down, it should have been lights out, but no, I had to hang on for a bit longer, and I ripped it off. Anyway, I didn't actually know because I had the glove on, and I thought, oh, damn it, So I go to pick the cart up and see if I can get restarted, and the seat was all broken, and flipped it over and go, no, this is no good. Anyway, I dragged the cart off and I go, geez, the hand's a bit sore. I lifted up my glove and the index finger there just flopped over. And I'm going, oh, this is all bad. And then there was obviously a fair bit of claret kicking around. And I thought, oh, this is no good. Anyway, I pulled my glove off and had a look, and then I'm going, oh, then I started to get a bit dizzy. This is all bad. But yeah, long and short of it is they stopped the race, and medics come over and gone, oh, Jesus, this is, And then the funny enough thing about it is then there was a search on, because some of the other drivers go over and they're going, well, see if we can find the finger, because we might be able to stitch it back on. So you had all these drivers and mechanics, and they're all going around on the top of the hill there at on the bridge on Oran Park looking for my finger. No one actually ever found it. I think it grew into a tree or something. I don't know. It's probably under a house at the moment there. And so that was strapped it all up and off to the local hospital at Narellan there, I think. And we ended up in Sydney Hospital, driving into Sydney and getting it fixed up. But the thing is, the week after that race was a race called the Hong Kong Grand Prix.
Yeah.
And it was a massive race they used to have at the basketball courts right in the centre of Hong Kong. And I got invited with Swiss Atlas to race there. So that was a week after it, and I was in the hospital for 2 days, and they said, what do you want to do? And I said, well, try and keep as much as you can. Let's stitch it up, and because I want to still make it to this race. And anyway, they looked at it and said, you ain't going anywhere. This is going to be months. I said, yeah, okay, typical. When you're young, you're full of beans. They stitched it up and got released from the hospital, signed myself out, and the mechanic I was with, who helped me with the carts, he said, we're still going to go? I said, damn right we are. We strapped it up, jumped on a burner, went over there, and it hurt like hell. And I got a few painkillers and stuff, and we ended up making a splint for it because it kept flopping around on the steering wheel because it's a really bumpy track, and my little finger kept bouncing up and down. And so we actually got some lollipop sticks and some race tape, and I made a little splint out of it. And anyway, we ended up in the semi-finals. I got fifth in the semi-finals. It was pouring down with rain. And, we damn nearly got a podium. So it was a really good, it was, again, life experiences. And, it was a wild one, that one. But funny enough, and it's now a bit of a thing with me, the missing finger. And
most definitely.
Again, not many people know what happened about it.
No. Cool story. Hey, I'm glad you bring up the fact that you were competing overseas there, because you'd won junior and senior titles in karting in Australia before you embarked on this. The good race drivers have this rite of passage going through Formula Ford in many respects. It's a common denominator on every CV. But I think it's important to point out with you, Russell, not every young racer has experience in karts internationally. But you did, didn't you?
Yeah, for sure. I used to race for the Swiss Atlas, who was one of the big. There was Carly Kart, Swiss Atlas, Techno. They were sort of like the big international brands that came to Australia. And I was part of the Swiss Atlas team towards the end of my career in karting. And the importer into Australia said, "Oh, look, Swiss Atlas have seen what you do over here, and they wanted to know if you're interested in doing a couple of rounds of the European Championship."
Mega.
And I said, hell yeah, on we go. And so we went over there for about 3 months, and my teammate was Mika Salo. He was the European Swiss Atlas driver, and so we went over there, and I think I must have been 16 because I was the only one that had a license, because we went over there and we went to the factory for a week, and they fitted out with a car, and it was phenomenal. Look, karting, and I presume it's just as big, but then it was mind-blowing because, in Australia you got one kart, one engine, and you go racing, and we went over there and went to the factory, and they said, "Oh, hi, Mr. Ingall," did the intros, and I'm walking around going, "How good's this? This is like a car factory, where they manufacture all the karts." And they said, "Oh, here's your karts for the next 2 rounds of the Italian or the European Championship, and there was like 15 chassis lined up, and I'm going. They had my name on it. I'm going, are you serious? It was like NASCAR, where they got
awesome,
just all lined up, engines ready to go. And we went out testing, and I think Fano was the first round of the championship there, and we got there, and because I was the only one that had a license, I drove the truck there because they said, here's your truck, Mika's going with you. There's all your carts, we'll put in the back loaded, you drive there and we'll meet you there. So we're driving around wrong side of the road, like here's this kid from Adelaide, like just absolute bogan, still got the mullet flowing out the back and that, and we were in the middle of Italy driving for one of the world's biggest kart teams, and not knowing at that stage, sitting next to what will be a Formula One driver, and here we are. We're rocking down there and rocking through Italy and going, how good's this? And roll up to these tracks. And like I said, we did 2 rounds of the European Championships, and I got 10th at Fano. And it was out of control. Like, it was just the level. And I liken it to going probably from clubby racing to going to Formula One. That's what it was like.
Such a step.
Oh, yeah. Transporters and just the magnitude. But then you look at all the drivers, and probably at that stage, all the drivers that ran into the Formula One drivers that ended up in Formula One in the 90s were there. They would have been racing karts, all the massive names, Morbidelli's, and just massive. And it was just another level. But again, it was all these experiences coming at me, and all this stuff flowing in that I'm going, yeah, okay. And again, you didn't think about it then because you were just flat out doing it, And then now I think back, Jesus, that was pretty cool.
Mega.
Not too many. When you look at all the drivers that you think about, even European drivers, but definitely in Australia, that didn't do that or didn't have the opportunity to do it. And I look back and go, man, that's so cool. But no one knew about it. I knew about it. And, the guys that helped me out, the mechanics that gave their time up, that came with me, and they knew about it. But the scope of it was unbelievable. But again, it kept feeding the beast as far as competition and levels. You know what I mean? Because I think any sport is I find it's just all levels, and you keep thinking the level is here, right? You think all I have to do is get here and I'm there. And then all of a sudden you go to a place like Europe and with European racing and you think, I'm only halfway there. That's not the level. The level's just been, is way over my head. So then you've got another target and you have to, get in there and do it. And I think with all those experiences combined, that's what, when I eventually ended up back in Australia, that's why I believe my level was so high, is because, I was pushed so hard earlier on. Well, I saw what the goal was, and saw what I had to do to make it. And there was, you come out of it now. And then there's a couple of times I sort of went, whew, I think I can do it. But then once I got amongst it, there was a couple of little times there where I thought, man, I'm not sure whether I can get to where I'm not sure I can compete with these dudes. But again, I think that's part of the challenge of growing is going, nah, get that out of your head. Rightio. If he can do it, I can do it. He's got 2 arms and 2 legs, So I've just got to figure out a way to do it, and that's why I rate karts so highly, because all those experiences gave me the tools I needed to know that I can do it. You know what I mean? Because I think that's what it's about. And the raw form of motorsport teaches you that, and I think it'd be the same with motorbike riders when they're coming through those lower categories, that I think you're challenged harder then than you are later on down the road.
Right. I love it, Russell. I love the simplicity of the way you've broken it down and just the importance you've placed on karting there for people that are younger listeners. We'll come back to this European chapter because I think it's something that is not widely spoken about, but you had a big swing at it, and that's an important thing that I'd like to cover with you. Firstly, Formula Ford, though. Am I right in saying in the late 80s there that in only your second meeting in Australia, which may have been at the Australian Grand Prix, in fact, you finished in the top 3? Is that right?
Yeah. It was. I found Formula Fords it was hard because a kart is like a little Formula One car, very responsive and it's agile. And then you got into the Formula Ford and all of a sudden you got a gear shift and it's a little bit lazier. And I actually had to wind myself back a little bit, and go, right, okay, I've just got to figure out how this thing works because I can't throw it around like I did with a kart. I've got to be a bit kinder to it, So once I got my head around that, which it took me a meeting to do, and again, I suppose the competitive side came out, and I got to nail this fast because if I knew how expensive it was too. And that was the other part about it. I mean,
what were you spending back then in terms of budgets for a year for driver to Europe and stuff like that?
You're going to laugh, but I remember when in 1990, the year I won the Formula Ford Championship, in terms of
budgets for a year for driver to Europe and stuff like that,
Mark Larkham had the year before in '89, I think it was $60,000. So we did the whole year, and I was doing it from Adelaide as well, from my backyard at home. We did the whole year and won the year on $60,000. So it was. That's not including the car, of course, but so. That's pretty cheap. Go go-karting for that now. But I think when I started and did those few races in '88 and got a result, like I said, I thought, but I knew I had to get a result. If I'm going to try and, because I wasn't born with a silver spoon in my mouth. Like I said, it was just me and Dad growing up in Adelaide. Just he did more for me than I probably appreciate, as most fathers do. And but I knew if I was going to succeed, there was only one way I was going to do it, because I didn't know the system. I didn't know the people. I probably wasn't the most promotable person in the world either because, like I said, I was just a bogan from Adelaide, So I knew the only way I was going to get through is win races. It's the only way I'm going to do it. If I win races, I'll keep going, So I thought, I'm not going to do this whole, I'll take a year to get my eye in. I'll get my eye in after the first race, and then because I had to. And that's why those few races were so important, and getting that first podium was so important because all of a sudden people went, who's this dude? Hang on, he just come on and kick the butts of some of the best Formula Ford drivers kicking around, and okay, maybe I should pay attention. And then from that rolled on to a deal with Van Diemen, who supplied cars for, a subsidised car for '89 and then a free car for '90 through Steve Knott. From the late Steve Knott from Van Diemen Australia, and that helped me. But again, it wasn't later in Formula Ford that started. It was those two races, and it always amazes me with sport, and you can look at any story of successful people in sport. It's normally just one thing.
Pivotal moment, Russell, kind of thing. Yeah,
it is because that's what changes. So that's what I was saying. But I knew that. I knew I had to make an impact straight away. Otherwise, she was back to servicing cars. So it's a pretty good incentive. I can tell you.
So how were you making ends meet? What were you doing to sort of fund all this and keep it all going?
Mate, anything I could. There was one thing I was good at is wheeling and dealing, and
you still are.
I was buying and selling cars. I was still working on cars. Anything I could do. Again, the kart shop, before I got rid of that, helped me fund it along the way. But until I got that first sponsorship deal in '90, end of '88 and '89, I pretty well funded myself. And look, Dad helped me out along the way with it as well, but as much as he could. But it was. But we did it. We did it modestly. I was working on the car. Had a mate of mine, Bobby Smith, who was working on the cars for me, and he did it for free. So we were just had living expenses, and that was about it, and whatever parts. And fortunately enough, there was people that would supply stuff to us, and I started getting the odd deal here and there. And it's funny when you look at the two sponsors. I think one of the sponsors we had on the '89 Van Diemen was Caltex. Yep. Funny enough, I went on to win a championship with them.
Yeah,
and then it turned on to Castrol in the later on in '90. So it was, it's funny how they've followed me out throughout. But mate, it was tough though. But again, Greg, I think it really reinforces the fact that when you got to fight for something and it's not handed to you, mate, I think that's what brings out the best in someone. Yep. It's not always the good times is the bad times. It brings out anyone's character and will to survive, and the hunger. Exactly right, and I wouldn't have done it any other way. I reckon if it was handed to me too easy, I wouldn't have the whole story of my career wouldn't have turned out how it did, So I think it's an important lesson for anyone,
Most definitely. You've detailed there about, crucially, winning the 1990 Driver to Europe title, which would give you an opportunity to go back overseas. But I just want to touch on, if we can, the Formula Ford Series at that stage would venture to Bathurst, which would feature prominently in your life, Russell. My question's a little bit loaded here, okay? Because years later, Brett Crusher Murray, who's been a publicist and around for a long time, says he can vividly recall going on a road trip with you from Sydney to Bathurst over the Blue Mountains, and he said the moment Russell could see the Mount Panorama sign and see the track for the first time, you changed. It was like white line fever. It had a huge impact on you, mate, didn't it? Even from those first early meetings with Formula Ford. Yeah,
absolutely. And it's funny. I don't get to. No one or any situation doesn't bother me too much. I'm pretty strong-willed, as you know.
Yes.
Or not that I show sometimes, but it's funny that it's the Bathurst track alone. I've never experienced this before. When you roll up to a place for the first time, it's usually all you want to do is get there, jump in the car, get out the first practice session, and start work. And it shows you the power and the aura of the Bathurst circuit. Is that I remember going there. I think it happened both times. I think in 88 and 89 when I first went there for the first time in Formula Ford. We were driving in the track and started to get closer and started driving up that bit of a hill on the way to where the entrance is and that sort of thing. I started getting nosebleeds.
Really?
Yeah, and I thought, what? It's a bit odd. And the first time it happened, I thought, maybe just, I don't know, maybe it's the height. Adelaide's pretty low, so maybe it's, I don't know. So I didn't pay. But the second time I went, this is really odd. And, like I said, my mechanic, Bobby looked at me and go, what's going on with you? You got some sort of disease? I said, I'm fucking if I know. Never had it before. Never at any stage, but when someone smacked me in the nose a few times, I've got a few nosebleeds. But apart from that, and all it was just you start the anxiety, nerves as well, especially when you go into a place like that. And again, it was one of those things, young guy, trying to make a career, realise the enormity of where we're about to go. Yes, you're not in the touring car race, but you're in front of all of those guys, the importance of doing well, winning, and just bloody goddamn nosebleed. I can't believe it. But it obviously it stopped after that, but it stopped, but the nerves were still there. I remember right through to the Castrol days of rolling in there, and the first days with Larry, every time you'd roll into Bathurst, and it was just, man, your heart would just go up to about 200 beats a minute, and you feel the nerves, and only that place, only that one place. So it's not like you'd roll into Winton or anywhere like that again, but that joint there, man, it's it's quite extraordinary, really.
The world's fastest go-kart is the all-electric Daymax C5 Blast. It's made in Canada and it can go from 0 to 60 miles per hour in just 1.5 seconds.
The next 4 to 5 years would focus very heavily on Europe, but your wife, who's an amazing photographer, and people can follow her on Instagram, we'll cover a little bit of her stuff in Europe and some of the people she worked and photographed over there in a moment. But she shared a photo recently, Russell, of you, VL Commodore, Bob Forbes, Kevin Bartlett, 1990. What was that like? Well,
Wally Story, who was engineer for the GIA team, and Bob Forbes, he was a big Formula Ford advocate. Raced himself. Wally Story was a fast racer in his own, work on his own gear, used to make his own Formula Ford, and he really knew what it took to be competitive in Formula Ford, and he he really appreciated that. And I think after winning the championship, he was, he said, oh, yeah, and I used to look to him for advice on a lot of things and setup, and he'd freely give it, which was great, because we didn't know everything about it, because going from karts to Formula Ford, something with suspension, and all of a sudden you've got all these different dynamics going on, and going, oh, geez, this is a bit harder than a go-kart to set up. And so he gave us a lot of advice on it. So I think he knew, and he pushed my barrow to getting that drive. And then, it was rolled up there, and it was such a deep end from going from Formula Ford, because the LVL Commodores, look, it was a great era racing, but trust me, they weren't the best things to drive, because they had that. And I'm talking across the board here, not just a VL Commodore. I mean, sure, all the makes were the same, but they had that bird bar thing on the back, no aero. The things were loose as hell. Like, they had a ton of horsepower. You're sitting in this seat, with a big old gear shift H pattern. It was massive. And then you go to Bathurst, so you got no experience in a touring car. You're used to cars that actually handle. This thing did neither, and
loads of power.
Loads of power. One of the most daunting racetracks in the world. What could go wrong? So it was great. He really helped me, to get up to pace, and obviously with had KB there, and it was, in the end, it ended up going. We went pretty well, but it was it also made up my mind, that race there in particular, and totally loved it. And a lot of people didn't realise I raced Bathurst, because I sort of only did that one race and then went overseas. They thought my touring car career started in '95 when I did the co-drive with Larry. But it actually, and not too many people know about the '90 Bathurst. It sort of flew under the radar a bit, because obviously there was, all the legends were there, and we flew under. We were just part of the show rather than being the show. And so it was, but that also made up my mind that I wanted to go overseas, because with no disrespect to that era of racing and that, I was going from proper race cars to the touring cars, which were a hybrid of a road car and a race car. And I enjoyed it, but I thought, I'm not ready for this yet. I really enjoyed it. The race was great. Brought it home. Everything was good. But I was still following the Formula One dream. Right. So that sort of reaffirmed my position that I want to go overseas and chase this. I don't want to stay here and race touring cars. So that was the call I made, and that was sort of like really the stamp. Then I went, yep, okay. I definitely know what I want to do now.
And typical your first year in British Formula Ford, which is seen as the benchmark, you have to make an impact straight away. It can't be I'll spend this year learning and then I'll be right in 92. Russell, am I right in saying you went within 5 points of winning the title or something in that first year, didn't you?
Yeah, in 90, yeah. And it was, again, I liken it to the karting when I went to Europe. And did those couple of rounds of the European Championship. It was the same, going from Formula Ford in Australia, which was very competitive, but then I went to England, and it was like, whoa, Jesus! It was out of control, because you got to remember, over there, everyone's trying to be a Formula One star that's in Formula Ford, and you've got the best in the world, all sort of congregating to UK, because UK was the hub. If you wanted to make it Formula One, you had to go to UK and do Formula Ford, F3, and then you could start going out to the series in Europe, like Formula 3000 then was the category below F1, but they had a lot of European, but UK was it. So you got all these mad Italians and French and Spanish and American, and they're all there. Every country's represented, racing Formula Ford, knowing this is where I kick off, trying to get to Formula One. And they're all as mad as cut snakes, and they're all trying to kill you. And so rocking over to the atmosphere, and there wasn't just one. You know how you get a championship and there's probably a handful of guys you really know that's my competition. This was the whole field, and so that first year, and you're right, I mean, I went over there, I sold everything we had. So I had a Ford panel van, my trailer. I had a speedboat that I built and never even got to use because I really like water skiing. We used to go up Murray Bridge all the time water skiing. Never even used a thing. I sold every single thing I had, my 90 Formula Ford, everything I owned, cashed in I took out, I don't know why I was captain safety back then, but I somehow got conned into an AMP life insurance thing as well when I was doing my apprenticeship as a motor mechanic, and I cashed that in. And so we're talking everything, Greg.
All on the line, Russell, all on the line.
I had a bag, a toolbox, and I remember this distinctly. We rolled up at Heathrow Airport, right, beginning 1990. Heathrow Airport with beginning 91, with a toolbox, my mechanic, and that was it. We had the bags, had enough cash in the bank to pay for the first year, and that was it. And we're standing there going, rightio, what do we do now? Okay, well, we got to find Van Diemen because we've done a deal with them. Van Diemen said, okay, for winning the championship in Australia, we'll give you a car and our factory workshop to work out if we run the factory Duckham's team. But you have to come up with a budget to run it for the year. Okay, let's do it. So we went out there. We grabbed a car, went up to Thetford, up to Van Diemen's, to the main factory. Nowhere to stay. We bunked out with a couple of mechanics for a couple of days, found a place to rent, just a little dog box. So there was about 5 of us living in there, just sharing the joint, and that was it. So we rolled up there. Literally, that's what we had: a toolbox and a couple of suitcases.
Nice.
And that was our whole possessions. Everything else had gone. Every single dollar that I had was going to pay for that year. I picked up a local sponsor in Bradshaw Vehicles, who make electric vehicles, or those little buggies you see around the airports. They were made locally at Peterborough, so picked them up. And I think that was I think he was like £5,000 or something, and he gave us a little van to drive around in. And that was it. That was the first year in 91. So again, it comes down to this thing. This is it. I've just sold up every possession I own. I'm plugging everything into this. If I don't do any good and it's over in a year, I go back to Adelaide, back living with Dad, and back repairing cars. You know, that's what the life's going to turn out to be. So I thought, okay, well, best we get into this.
They talk about risk reward, Russell. That really was all on the line. And you've always been streetwise, mate. You correct me if I haven't quite got the year right or this story right, but I want to say the Duckham's team, the factory team, there was a wall between your factory and theirs. And I think Julia might have been just the right size to sort of sneak through the air conditioning duct and have a bit of a look, see what the factory team were up to in order to give you the latest info. It's something like that, isn't it? You did everything you possibly could.
Yeah, well, look, we were, yeah. I think it's safe enough to talk about this now. I don't think I'm going to go listen. I think Ralph Furman, who owns Van Diemen, he's moved on. So, but we, look, the factory team ran off a building right next to where the manufacturing was. So all the Van Diemen's, the Formula Ford 2000s, Formula Fords, everything they made, they distributed throughout the world, was made next door. And there was a brick wall up, and there was a little sort of like a heating vent down the base where we worked on the cars. So they were a normal setup where you had your cars in little bays, you know.
Yep.
And we had the keys to the joint, of course, because we used to go back there at night at working, and there was a massive rivalry between ourselves and the factory Duckham's team. And the guy, Puddy, they called him, who ran the Duckham's team, because he suddenly realised, I've got a bit of a challenger on my hands. Because the Duckham teams won every year. Duckham team, if you got the factory Duckham's drive, it was like being the Mercedes of Formula One. That was the drive to get. And Mark Goosens was the driver then, and he was a factory-backed Marlboro driver. And we were so bucks down, and we were given the championship a nudge. Like, I didn't even were winning this thing, much to their Ralph Furman, who owned Van Diemen, loved it because there was this real push that we were pushing ourselves so hard that it pushed us ahead of everyone else and all the other factory teams. So there was this little open event, and we were running out of money fast. So anything we could save, brake pads, discs, or that sort of thing. So what we used to do is I tried to send Julia through once and she got a bit spooked. So I ended up having to go through because I was a lot skinnier back then. And, so Russell Atkinson, who was my mechanic, he used to be the lookout. And so once the factory cleared out, I used to crawl through this hole in there, go into the factory, and then that way we could have a look around, scout around, pitch the brake pads, some discs, kicking around, because there was just thousands of them. So we used to rearrange everything so they wouldn't feel it was missing. So, and then we'd have a little stash hole in that. So, brake fluids and anything we could get, any consumables, all right, that we could get through there, we'd get. And this went on all year. I think Ralph Furman knew what we were up to. Because we were doing all right, I think he let it go because they must have been doing stock takes and going, Jesus Christ, we're going through a lot of brakes and brake discs and brake pads here. So we used to get all that out. But we had to, because to compete where they were, you had to keep throwing parts at it, had to keep throwing the best you could, brakes, discs, fluids, engines, So, mate, it's what you had to do. If it didn't do that, we weren't going to be competitive. So just did it, and mate, that was only part of it. It's probably some I can't tell you. Again, it was that Adelaide thing, Adelaide boy growing up. Yeah, just do what you had to do, mate. But we only just missed out on the championship in the first year that year, but that's what led on to other things in the F3 deal, but that was a big year. But again, it was, let's just do this. Let's just do it,
Yeah, so be it. Exactly. You would win it in 93 with a dominant year, Russell. We'll get to that shortly, but you've alluded to it there a moment ago, because a window opens to get from England into Europe to another class of racing as well, and it exposed you to some of the great tracks of Europe, some big names that were around then too. And this is not sort of widely known, this aspect of your career, is it?
No, it was an interesting sort of period where I sort of was jumping around a little bit, and I thought I'd be doing another year of Formula Ford, but in '92 I met through Van Diemen's, I got introduced to a German team who used to deal with Ralph Furman and Van Diemen, and Horst Schubel, and he was a factory or semi-supported Opel team. They used to run the Jägermeister cars, those orange Jägermeister cars in the awesome. DTM, when DTM was like in a bit. That was the category in the world, just down from F1. And so we ended up striking a deal, went over and did a test and striking a deal to run F3 in the German Formula 3 Championship. And the German Formula 3 Championship was just awesome, and Sasha Masson, and there was some serious competitors in it, and I think the German F3 Championship was widely regarded as a place to go if you're still trying to make do the Formula One thing, but also for DTM or sports car racing in particular in Europe, which was huge, which Mark Webber raced. The German F3 Championship was a great breeding ground for those avenues. So I thought, man, I can't pass this up. I would have loved to do another year of Formula Ford and try and win it, but it was too good an opportunity, and it was a big jump. Never driven an F3 car before. I drove a Vauxhall Lotus a couple of times for Martin Donnelly when I was in England in '91, but it was a massive move, and again, a country change. So we've been a couple of years in England, and then to head over to Germany, which is just that, and it's alone, So you go to a country. We drove over there, took the ferry across, took whatever we had left, parked up, and we got a little apartment that got organised for us, which was under a house of this old couple in Germany. Couldn't speak English, so no one in the town hardly spoke English. So you got a different country, different culture. It was all cool. We just relished in it though, because I like that sort of stuff. Julia loved it, and And she shouldn't be underestimated in this whole deal, because she's the one that had to do the crappy jobs in England and work in pubs and all the rest of it to keep us in food. And I'll tell you a quick one, because we'll talk about graft and corruption. But she was used to work in one of those little pubs in England, one of those quaint little low ceiling pubs, very cool.
Beautiful.
And that's where everyone old school, had £5 schnitzel nights and stuff like that. So she was a waitress in one of those for most of the year, and because we just used to eat cheap and nasty, so once a week we used to go down there, and but she was a free-for-all, so we'd order the biggest steaks. And Russell Atkinson, who was a mad smoker, he used to grab packets of smokes and everything, but Julie used to write out the bill. Hence, the bill wasn't probably as high as what it should have been. So £5 schnitzel night was pretty damn cheap, I can tell you, considering how much we loaded up. But anyway, so but like I said, she was a big part of this whole deal. So we move over to Germany, and just fantastic, because again, it's that level thing. You go there, big workshops. The level of preparation. We're talking big Pantex and B doubles and all the rest of it for these Formula 3 teams. All the major manufacturers. There was Mercedes, Volkswagen, Opel were all sponsors, engine sponsors of a lot of the teams there, and they used to follow the DTM championship. So we're talking, I think at the Norris Ring, close to where we lived, it was 130,000 spectators rolled up on the weekend. And it was just to go from UK was one thing, and then you go there and it was just next level stuff again. And there we were right in the middle of it, and we followed the DTM championship. So you went to all these cool tracks, and Arvis, which was an airport, and they used to mark it out with hay bales. And so you went off and on access roads, and then on the main strip of this airfield, just all these cool places. And it was just phenomenal, but tough, because Formula 3 was hard. And again, it was one of those things where I was getting kicked around a bit and went, Jesus, I'm not sure about this. And we probably didn't, not pulling out the equipment card, but we definitely didn't have the best of the factory stuff. And that was hard. But that was one of the toughest years, because I thought this could break me, if I didn't start pulling out some results. Unfortunately, towards the end, we did. And that kept me in the game again. But it also was probably one of the biggest mistakes I made in my career in leaving that championship.
That's the end of part one of my podcast with Supercars champion and Bathurst winner Russell Ingall. This is a three-parter, and they're all in the library ready to go now, so don't worry, we haven't staggered the releases on you. Make sure you head back and hit the gas on the next instalment. Part two's a ripper and includes a chance meeting with the great Ayrton Senna, the Stone Brothers Ford chapter, and the part his cheeky mate Barry Sheen played. Very funny PR stunt that ended up on the front page, plus the enforcer tag, the upsides and the burdens of his famous nickname.
Listener.